Hello everyone, this is David Taylor from the Effective Writing Center. Your professor has provided us a sample paper to review with you to help prepare you for this important assignment, the written critique of article and presentation. Let's go over some of the highlights of the assignment directions. First, the essential direction. Each student will critique an article from a psychological journal on an issue affecting interpersonal relationships. Magazine and newspaper sources are not acceptable. For example, the Journal of Counseling or the Journal of Consulting and Clinical Psychology is acceptable, but Psychology Today, which is a magazine, is not. An abstract alone is not acceptable. Generally speaking, the differences between a magazine and a journal are that journals do not take consumer advertising, but magazines do. A second key difference is that articles and journals are written by credentialed, professional experts in the field, whereas magazine articles are generally written by staff writers. And finally, another key difference is that articles and journals are peer-reviewed. In other words, they are not published until reviewed by recognized experts in the same field and given the okay. Magazine articles are only reviewed by the editorial staff itself. Lastly, the direction here reads, you may choose a topic based on one of the 14 chapters from your textbook for the course. And after you do that, you are to write a 5 to 7 page double-spaced essay, 12-point size. Generally speaking, when you use 12-point Times New Roman on a page, you get about 330 words. And that 5 to 7 pages is exclusive of any title page or reference page. In your paper, the following criteria must be included. Please place special emphasis on these 4 criteria because they can and should form the basis of the divisions of your 5-page double-spaced essay. So certainly, in one section of your essay, you should summarize the article. In another section of your essay, you should critically analyze the author's main points. Third, indicate the pros and cons of the article with regard to, and here are the criteria you must consider, experimental design, selection of participants, the setting in which the experiment took place, the validity and the reliability. And finally, in the last section, D here, you are to make your own recommendations to improve the article. Now, after you have written the essay, turned it in, and has those sections in it, your professor is going to evaluate that essay using these 3 primary criteria. 1, an adequate description of the topic. And remember, you're choosing a topic from one of the chapters of your textbook. Second criterion, the thoughtfulness of your analysis. In other words, your ability to apply the content and concepts, knowledge learned in this course to your look at, your critical analysis of the information in the article. And third, the expository clarity and coherence of your paper. Expository clarity means exposition, which means to explain. How clearly did you explain something? And coherence means the organizational pattern or the flow of the ideas. And as you will see in this model paper, the use of headings and subheadings play a key role in shaping the coherence of your paper. And of course, we hope that you have already obtained approval from your instructor before beginning work on the assignment. With those preliminaries out of the way, let's take a look at a model paper. This model paper, as we indicated, was provided by your professor. As you can see, it is written in APA style. It's always good to select and stick with one style, academic style, throughout your writing, and that helps give your paper a type of coherence. We know that this is APA because there is a running head up at the top. Running head consists of the first 3 or 4 words of your main title in all caps, and followed by the page number on the far right-hand side. And your writing advisor for this course will provide a video on how to set up your paper in APA style if you wish to follow that style consistently throughout. In the approximate center of the title page is the full title of your essay. And here Jane Doe's full title is A Summary and Critical Analysis. And now comes the title of the article she provides a summary and analysis of. The Interpersonal Process Model of Intimacy in Marriage, a daily diary and multi-level modeling approach, end quotes. So the entire title of the article being summarized and analyzed is in quote marks. After double spacing is the student's name, and of course the name has been changed here. And then after Jane Doe, double spacing in the name of your academic affiliation. Your professor has also allowed us to keep the comments that he wrote on this paper, and let's read them together. It should provide us a description of what a good paper is. Your professor writes, a very thorough paper. If it's true that the authors actually made causal statement, then I'm proud of your analysis and explanation of the possible correlations really involved. I like your recommendations. Your writing style is clear and well organized. As you can see, the professor here is making comments on the 3 grading criteria that were promised to be used whenever analyzing your paper. You did let a few sentences get away from you. For example, there are quite a few pros and cons involved in the study. Made me think I was in for several paragraphs of comments instead of the 4 valid points you made. Nevertheless, a remarkably cogent analysis. Instead of there are quite a few, which indeed the sentence does get away with kind of casual language, you want to maintain your professional, cautious language throughout, saying something like, there are both pros and cons to this study. Remember, in academic writing, you want your language to be plain, and especially not being adorned by casual or colloquial speech. Here is the first page or body page of the article. Here is where the student not only repeats the main title of the paper, but also discusses what topic from the textbook is going to be presented in the summary and critical analysis. So let's begin to read a little bit together. Relationship scientists often conduct studies to fill the gaps left by other studies and to support data proposed by scientific theories, a kind of really broad statement about the overall scientific process. That statement leads to the first mention of the article under consideration, quotation mark for title. The Interpersonal Process Model of Intimacy in Marriage, a daily diary and multi-level modeling approach, by Jean-Philippe Laurenceau, Lisa Feldman Barrett, and Michael J. Rovine, is one such study that aims to answer thus far unanswered questions about intimacy predictors in marriage. So there is your topic that's being considered, and there's the research gap that this research study is trying to fill. Ultimately, this study documents and evaluates the interpersonal components involved in intimacy as originally proposed by, quote, the interpersonal model of intimacy, and that's from Reese and Shaver, as noted with the in-text citation. Now, next, notice how this author is starting to use headings, main headings, and subheadings. One of the sections of your paper must be a summary, so that has been made the main heading of this section of the paper. That's why it is centered and bold-faced. But notice that the summary being provided by the student, Jane Doe, is also broken down into subsections, and thus you have a subheading, which is italicized and left aligned. So first we're going to look at the history of intimacy research. So here Jane Doe presents the history of intimacy research as found in the article. And the next subtitle is The Interpersonal Model of Intimacy in Close Relationships. Here, the authors of the article under consideration presented the interpersonal model of intimacy by Reese and Shaver. and are going to use that as their theoretical model to base their experiment on. Here's our next subheading, which was the goal of the current study. And again, this is summarized from the article under consideration. Our next subheading, participants, also summarized from the article under consideration. Next subheading, method. The experimental method, and this is all in Jane Doe's words. This is Jane Doe's summary of the method used by the experimenters in the article she is analyzing and summarizing. After the methodological summary, Jane presents the measures, how the data was evaluated. The data was evaluated, as you see here, by 3 different tools. Jane discusses those tools and the outcomes, what those tools found. So that completes Jane's summary of the article under consideration. And we know that because now we are at a second main heading, or level 1 heading, which is centered and bold-faced. So we know, the teacher knows, that Jane has completed her first task, which is to provide a full summary of the article. And now begins Jane's critical analysis. Now Jane turns from summary mode to analytical mode. And let's read a little bit of what Jane wrote. The researchers effectively proposed and implemented a study that provided data in support of Rice and Shaver's 1988 interpersonal model of intimacy. And now, having given a topic sentence for this paragraph, she now supports that topic sentence by saying, first of all, they attributed, and then she describes what they did first in order to make this successful, what she calls, or effective implementation of a study. Then she describes the second thing that the researchers found in this, quote, effective study. And notice how she is using signal words, again, to achieve coherence in this essay. She uses the word thirdly to indicate here is the third way that the researchers effectively conducted the study. And here is the fourth and final way that the researchers effectively conducted the study. In other words, it is the fourth point of Jane's analysis. After the 4 points of Jane's critical analysis, we have another or a third level 1 subheading, our main heading, called benefits and drawbacks. And here is the sentence that Jane was criticized over. There are quite a few pros and cons. Instead, she should have stuck with academic language such as, this study provides both pros and cons, or there are pros and cons that can be observed in this study. And notice that she's going to continue to provide transition words to help the reader know when she's transitioning from one pro or con to the next. Second, having a research assistant was effective, but third, the lack of diversity was a negative. So she very clearly numbers each point that she is making before she makes it. And now the last section that is required in the assignment instructions is recommendations for improvement. And here Jane Doe provides her recommendations. She leads off with the topic sentence. To improve this study, a few modifications are required. And here she goes. For starters, the participants ought to report on the interpersonal components of intimacy on an interaction by interaction basis. And that would result in the study mirroring the Rice and Shaver theory. Thus, any findings in support of the theory would have been more accepted as valid and significant. Here, she brings in another recommendation. Also, the study would benefit from being conducted over a longer period of time. A third recommendation, furthermore, research assistants should meet with the participants once a week. And her final recommendation, Finally, the researchers refrain from making statements assuming causation. Jane adds her own conclusion that brings together her summary, critical analysis, and recommendations. And she does this in the conclusion paragraph. In conclusion, this study effectively accomplished its original goals to gather data based on the Rice and Shaver 1988 theory about the interpersonal components of intimacy. The study also evaluated the global marital satisfaction and the degree of demand-withdrawal communication as related to intimacy. While the study provides a solid beginning for support of that theory, a few modifications and additional research will be essential to further support the findings in this study. So Jane ends by carving out another research gap that more study is needed to fill. Jane provides a page break, and then on a final page by themselves are the references used in the writing of this paper and that were referred to with in-text citations throughout. So that concludes our examination of this model paper. What we have seen most importantly is that whenever given a set of instructions, your best bet in order to fulfill the professor's expectations is to follow them exactly. And that is exactly what Jane did, summarizing the article, analyzing the article, indicating its pros and cons, and then making her own recommendations for improvement. She did a great job, and I bet you're going to do a great job as well.